There is a moment in every nursing graduation ceremony when the names are called one by one, and each graduate walks across the stage alone, and the auditorium fills with whatever sound their people make from the seats. Cheering, whistling, someone's mother crying loudly enough for the whole row to hear. I had been thinking about that moment for 3 years. 3 years of overnight shifts, clinical rotations, 12-hour days on my feet in hospital corridors, licensing exams studied for at kitchen tables at 2 in the morning. I had imagined that moment so many times it had become something close to a promise I made to myself during the hardest stretches, a fixed point in the future I could orient myself toward when everything else felt impossible. When my name was called on that stage, the auditorium did fill with sound, just not from the seats where my family was supposed to be sitting. Those seats were empty. My parents had decided 4 days before my graduation ceremony that my sister's birthday dinner was a more important place to be that evening. What happened instead, from a different section of that auditorium, from people I had met under completely different circumstances, is something I have thought about nearly every day since. My name is Angela, and this is the story of the night my family chose a dinner reservation over 3 years of my life, and what filled that empty space instead. I grew up the older of 2 daughters in a household that operated, for as long as I could remember, according to a very particular set of unspoken rules about which of us mattered more in any given moment. My sister Cassandra is 4 years younger than me, and from the time she was old enough to have preferences, her preferences consistently reorganized the family around themselves. This was never stated directly. Nobody in my family would have agreed with that characterization if I had ever been direct enough to offer it, which for most of my life I wasn't. It expressed itself instead in the accumulated texture of 1,000 small decisions made across years, whose school events got both parents present, whose extracurricular activities got funded without discussion, whose college plans were treated as a priority requiring family meetings, and whose were treated as something that would work itself out. I was always the one whose things would work themselves out. Cassandra was always the one whose things required the family's full, organized attention. By the time I finished high school and started making decisions about my future, I had internalized this dynamic so completely that I almost didn't notice I was choosing my career partly based on what I could realistically fund on my own, without assuming family support that might or might not materialize. I chose nursing because I genuinely wanted it, because something in me had always been drawn toward the specific kind of care it required, the sustained, practical, deeply human work of helping people through their most vulnerable moments. But I also chose it because the program I was accepted to offered strong financial aid, because the career path was stable, because it was something I could build entirely on my own terms without needing anyone's approval or financial backing to make it real. I applied, got in, told my parents over dinner one evening, received polite enthusiasm from both of them, and started the following September without much further family conversation about it. Nursing school was the hardest thing I had ever done, and I mean that in the most literal, specific sense possible. The academic workload alone was brutal. Pharmacology, pathophysiology, clinical decision-making under pressure, examinations that tested not just knowledge but judgment in ways that felt genuinely high stakes, because they were genuinely high stakes. People's lives, eventually, would depend on whether I understood what I was learning. That knowledge sat underneath everything, making the studying feel different from any studying I had done before. On top of the academics were the clinical rotations, real hospital floors with real patients, supervised but genuinely consequential, exhausting in a physical way that I hadn't fully anticipated, even after being warned about it by every nurse I had spoken to before starting the program. I worked a part-time job throughout all 3 years. Weekend shifts at a grocery store that paid modestly but consistently, covering the gap between my financial aid and my actual living expenses. I slept less than I needed to for 3 years. I ate badly during exam weeks and forgot to call people back and missed social events I would have liked to attend. I did all of this willingly, because the degree at the end of it was something I wanted with a clarity and consistency I had rarely felt about anything. I just needed to get there. In the final semester of my nursing program, I was placed for my primary clinical rotation on a cardiac care unit at a large regional hospital, a fast-moving, high acuity floor that was widely known among nursing students as one of the more demanding rotation placements available. I was nervous going in and exhausted within the first week, and then, gradually, over the following weeks, more at home there than I had expected to feel anywhere in a clinical setting. Something about the pace, the specificity of the work, the way every hour required complete, focused presence, suited the way my mind worked in a way that felt clarifying rather than draining. The patients on that floor cycled through with the particular rhythm of cardiac care, some brief stays for monitoring and adjustment, some longer and more complicated, some that became extended over weeks as treatment plans evolved and recovery proved slower than anyone had hoped. Families were a constant presence on that unit, the way they are anywhere people are seriously ill, gathered in waiting areas and at bedsides, navigating the specific combination of fear and exhaustion and boredom and desperate attention that serious illness produces in the people who love the patient. I met Mr. Harrison during my 6th week on the unit. He was 73 years old, admitted following a significant cardiac event, soft-spoken and methodical in the way of someone who had spent a long professional life being careful and precise. He was a retired civil engineer who had spent his career designing infrastructure, bridges mostly, and he had the particular quality of attention that I associated with people who had spent decades being responsible for things that mattered if they got them wrong. He asked good questions about his treatment. He remembered the names of everyone who came into his room. He thanked people specifically for specific things in a way that made you feel genuinely seen rather than generically appreciated. His family visited consistently throughout his stay. His wife Eleanor came every afternoon, staying for several hours, bringing small things he had asked for, and sitting with him through the slow, repetitive rhythms of hospital days with the practiced ease of a long marriage. His son Michael visited several evenings a week after work, a quiet man in his 40s who had clearly inherited his father's careful, attentive quality. His daughter Sarah came on weekends, louder and warmer than the rest of them, the kind of person who improved the energy of whatever room she entered simply by being fully present in it. Over the weeks of Mr. Harrison's stay, I became genuinely fond of his family in the way you sometimes become fond of patients' families when you spend enough time in the same space under significant circumstances. They were kind to the staff in a way that didn't feel performative, asked about our lives with genuine curiosity, learned small details and remembered them. Sarah remembered that I was in my final semester of nursing school. She asked about it during one visit, and I mentioned, without thinking much about it, that graduation was coming up at the end of the month. She asked if my family was excited. I said yes, in the automatic way you say things that are mostly true and easier than the longer answer. Mr. Harrison was discharged successfully and on schedule, 10 days before my graduation ceremony. His family thanked the floor staff with a warmth that was typical of how they had been throughout his entire stay. I helped him into the wheelchair for his discharge, walked his chart to the nursing station, and didn't think much beyond the relief that he was going home in good shape and that the rotation had gone well. 4 days before my graduation ceremony, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing material for my final licensing exam component. She had the particular tone in her voice that I had learned, over years, to recognize as the delivery mode for information she expected would require management rather than a simple response. She led with several minutes of general conversation, asking about my week, mentioning something about a neighbor, commenting on weather, all of it functioning as a kind of runway before whatever was actually coming. Then she told me Cassandra's birthday was that Saturday, the same Saturday as my graduation ceremony, a coincidence that had existed on the calendar for months, that my mother had known about since I had sent my parents the graduation invitations 6 weeks earlier. The family had decided, she explained, using that particular passive construction that made decisions sound like weather rather than choices, that they were going to take Cassandra to dinner at a restaurant she had been wanting to try for months, a special place that required a reservation made weeks in advance. It would be a long evening, my mother said. The restaurant was in the opposite direction from the university. It simply wasn't going to be practical to do both. I sat on my bed in my apartment for a moment after she finished explaining, holding my phone, looking at the study materials spread across my comforter. I asked, because I needed to hear the answer said directly rather than implied through logistics. whether they were choosing not to come to my graduation ceremony. My mother said, in the careful voice of someone who had prepared for this question, that they were sorry the dates conflicted, that they wished things were different, that they would celebrate with me another time, that they hoped I understood. I said that I understood. I said it in the same automatic way I had said yes when Sarah had asked if my family was excited. Then I ended the call and sat quietly for a while, not crying, not angry exactly, just sitting with the specific, familiar weight of being the daughter whose things would work themselves out. Cassandra's birthday happened every year. My nursing graduation was happening once. That calculation had been made somewhere in my family, quietly and apparently without much difficulty, and the result was what my mother had just told me over the phone in her management voice. I called my closest friend from the nursing program, a woman named Diane, who had been in my cohort for all 3 years, and who knew my family situation well enough that I didn't need to explain the background before telling her what had happened. She was furious on my behalf in a way I couldn't quite access for myself yet. She told me she would sit in the family section herself, that she would make enough noise for 20 people, and I laughed at that, genuinely, which helped more than she probably knew. I went back to my study materials after we hung up. I finished the chapter I had been working on. I set my alarm and went to sleep. I did not call my parents back. I did not argue, or plead, or send a message explaining what 3 years of nursing school had actually cost me in ways that had nothing to do with the tuition figures. I had learned over years of being the daughter whose things worked themselves out, that those conversations rarely produced the outcomes they were theoretically aimed at, and I had decided, somewhere in the quiet hour after my mother's call, that the energy I might spend on that argument was energy I needed for the following Saturday morning. The morning of my graduation, I dressed carefully in my apartment. The nursing pinning ceremony attire first, the white uniform that meant something specific in the nursing tradition, the pin that would be placed on my chest during the pinning ceremony that preceded the formal graduation, the cap I had pressed the night before. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment, the way I had looked at myself on difficult rotation mornings when I needed to remind myself what I was doing and why. And I felt something steady and clear underneath the complicated layer of everything the previous 4 days had deposited on top of it. Diane met me outside the auditorium, dressed up and warm and furious in the loyal way of very good friends, and we went in together. She found a seat in the family section with an exaggerated announcement that she was representing my entire support system personally, which made me laugh again, and I found my place with the graduating cohort, 212 nursing students arranged in rows, all of us in identical white, all of us carrying 3 years of the same general shape of exhaustion and pride and relief. The pinning ceremony came first. It is a nursing tradition, older than most people know, the formal pinning of each graduate by someone who matters to them, a symbolic passing of care from one generation of nurses to the next. Most of my cohort had family members waiting to pin them, parents, partners, siblings, children in a few cases. I had arranged for my clinical supervisor, a nurse named Margaret who had worked on the cardiac unit for 18 years and who had supervised my rotation there, to pin me instead. Margaret had agreed without hesitation when I asked her, telling me it would be an honor in the particular direct way of someone who meant it without needing to elaborate. When my name was called for pinning, Margaret stepped forward and placed the pin on my uniform with steady, practiced hands and said something quietly to me that was meant only for me, about what she had observed during my rotation and what she believed I would bring to this profession, and I held myself together through it by concentrating very deliberately on the pin itself, the small, specific weight of it being fastened to my uniform, the realness of that physical detail. Then the formal graduation ceremony began, names called alphabetically, graduates crossing the stage one at a time, the auditorium doing what auditoriums do when names are called, filling with the sound of whoever's people are in the seats. My name is near the middle of the alphabet. I had a few minutes of sitting and watching and listening before my row was called to line up, and I spent some of that time looking at the family sections, finding Diane, finding the empty seats I had reserved for my parents that were occupied now by strangers who had probably arrived late and found them conveniently open. I looked at those seats for a moment, and then looked away and focused on the stage. When my name was called and I walked across to receive my diploma, Something happened that I had not anticipated, and that I am still not sure I have the right words for even now. From a section of the auditorium near the back, not the family section where my reserved seats sat empty, but a different section, there was a sudden burst of sound, cheering, loud and genuine and completely unexpected. A woman's voice I recognized cutting through the general auditorium noise with a clarity that made several people around me turn to locate its source. I turned to, automatically, diploma in hand, cap slightly crooked from the crossing of the stage. In a row near the back of the auditorium sat Eleanor Harrison, and Michael Harrison and Sarah Harrison, and a man I recognized as Mr. Harrison himself, thinner than when he had been discharged, but upright and present, and clapping with the particular deliberate energy of someone to whom the act of clapping had recently required more effort than it used to. Sarah was the one whose voice I had recognized, standing, making the kind of noise she had always brought into whatever room she entered. Eleanor was crying in a quiet, genuine way. Michael was clapping steadily. Mr. Harrison caught my eye across the auditorium and nodded once, the careful, precise nod of a man who meant something specific by it. I stood at the edge of that stage for a moment longer than the ceremony technically required, holding my diploma, looking at a family that was not my family making more noise for me than the seats I had reserved for my own family were capable of making. Because those seats were empty, and these people had driven to a university auditorium on a Saturday evening to fill a space nobody had asked them to fill. I found the Harrisons in the reception area after the ceremony ended, and the conversation that followed was one of the most genuinely moving of my life. Which I say knowing how that sounds and meaning it anyway. Sarah explained that she had remembered, from our conversation during Mr. Harrison's stay, that graduation was coming up, and that something had made her mention it to the family after discharge, and that the family had decided, without apparently needing much discussion, that they wanted to be there. Mr. Harrison told me, in the careful, precise way he had of saying things that mattered, that the quality of care I had provided during his stay had not been lost on him, and that it had seemed important to him to be present for the moment it was formally recognized. Eleanor pressed my hands between both of hers and told me I was going to be a wonderful nurse. I held myself together through that with less success than I had managed during the pinning ceremony, which is to say I did not entirely hold myself together. But it was the kind of not holding together that felt appropriate rather than mortifying given the circumstances. My parents called that evening. After the ceremony had ended and the reception had wound down and I was back in my apartment with Diane, eating takeout and talking through the night in the way of people who have just completed something significant together. My mother's message said they hoped the ceremony had been lovely and that they were proud of me and that we should plan a celebration dinner soon. I listened to the message once and set my phone down and went back to the conversation I was already in. I called them back 2 days later, when I was ready to have the conversation clearly rather than from the immediate weight of the previous Saturday. I told them honestly what the evening had looked like from where I was standing, the empty seats, the Harrisons appearing from a different section, the specific experience of having strangers present for a moment I had worked 3 years toward, while my own family was at a dinner reservation. I said it without accusation in my voice, which took more deliberate effort than almost anything I had done in recent memory, because the point was not to wound anyone. The point was to be accurate about what had happened and what it had meant to me, which was something I had decided, somewhere during the ceremony itself, that I owed myself the honesty of saying directly, rather than absorbing quietly the way I had absorbed so many things before it. My mother cried during that conversation, genuinely, I think, and said things about not realizing how much it would mean, about Cassandra's birthday feeling like a fixed obligation in a way that my graduation had not. And I listened to all of it without arguing, because I understood, actually, that this was probably true. Cassandra's things had always felt fixed and obligated. Mine had always felt flexible and manageable. That was not a new dynamic invented for that specific Saturday. It was simply the most visible, undeniable expression that dynamic had ever taken. Fixed in my memory now with the specific clarity of a moment I will never forget. Things between my family and me changed after that conversation. Not dramatically, not in ways that would be obvious to anyone watching from the outside, but in the specific interior way that things change when something has been said directly, that had previously only been felt indirectly. My mother began asking about my work with a new specificity that felt like genuine effort to see something she had previously not looked at carefully. My father acknowledged, quietly and only once but clearly, that they had made the wrong call. Cassandra, when I saw her next, was unusually subdued in a way that suggested our mother had said something to her that I was not present for. I am a working nurse now. 2 years out of that graduation ceremony, I work on a cardiac unit, which surprises no one who knew me during my rotation year. The work is everything I thought it would be during the difficult stretches of nursing school, when I was studying at 2 a.m. and reminding myself of the fixed point ahead. It requires complete presence, sustained judgment, a specific kind of care that I find I have more capacity for than I had understood about myself before I started doing it every day. I think about the Harrisons sometimes. In the particular way you think about people who did something significant for you that they had no obligation to do. I think about Mr. Harrison's single, precise nod from across the auditorium, and Eleanor's hands around mine at the reception, and Sarah's voice cutting through the noise when my name was called, filling a space that had no business being as full as it ended up being given everything. I keep my nursing pin on the uniform I wore that evening. Margaret fastened it carefully and precisely, the way she did everything, and it has stayed where she put it. Some things stay exactly where they are placed, even when other things shift around them. That particular Saturday evening is one of those things for me, fixed, clear, and fully mine, regardless of who was or wasn't in the seats I had reserved for them.